Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to our video series on Active Directory, Red Team, tactics, techniques, and procedures. In our previous video, we did set up our Covenant C2 infrastructure. Now, just a quick note, this wasn't the typical C2 infrastructure you would build for, I would say, a large scale red team operation. We built this one just for the sake of this small lab and this video series. Of course, if you are engaged in a large scale red team operations, you are going to have to build a very resilient C2 infrastructure, with redirectors and domain fronting and other techniques to make your C2 infrastructure more resilient to discovery by blue teamers, right? So for the sake of this was the most simplest C2 that we can build for this series of videos. In the future, I plan on making a full detailed video on how we can build a resilient C2 infrastructure for performing red team operations. So for the sake of this, what we had with Covenant should be good enough for most of the things that we'll be doing from this video series, right? So now, first on the list is credential attacks. Now, if you are performing any offensive operations, whether it's a penetration test, red team operations, assume breach operations, purple teaming, anything, the concept of us as operators is we are not looking for the most elegant way to compromise or accomplish our goal. We are looking for the most efficient way. All right. So what that means is we are not going to portray the stuff you see on Hollywood movies and TV shows where people are hacking firewalls and jumping through fire and all those things just to breach an organization. We're looking for the most easiest way in the path of least resistance to actually accomplish our goal. Now, one of them is one of the many ways that we try to look for once we have established, or even if we're looking to establish our foothold, is credential attack, looking for password. It only takes one working credential to actually breach an entire organization. So for this, we are going to look at some of the ways that we can abuse credentials, or we can look for credentials on a network to accomplish our goal. This is not an exhaustive way. Again, these are some of the techniques that I have seen or used on engagements, and there could be several of them out there, right? So for the sake of this discussion, what I have here, we have few assumptions. First, we are assuming that we have established a foothold on a network. We have a domain user that we have compromised through whatever ways or means that we have actually established our foothold on a domain joined Windows machine. Now, the user that we have compromised doesn't have any privileges on that machine. All right. And again, most of the things that you see here, oh crap, I misspelled OPSEC. So forgive me. This is just one OP, not OPP. We are assuming that we are now really applying the normal OPSEC, mindset where we'll try to evade some, controls around the environment. Is for the sake of this demos and videos, I have relaxed some of the boxes. Eventually, we can do some videos on evasion techniques, whereby we can, beef up these security controls so we can try to evade some of them, right? So this is just for us to focus on some few techniques when we perform a red team operations on Windows environment. Right. So few credential attacks that I have come across, and most of you may have come across, is we're looking for credentials, clear text credentials. You'll be surprised. Well, some of you may not be. It's based on so many years of this work. You always find people saving credentials on their network, or whether on a shared drive or on their direct, on their home, directory or whatever, you tend to find credentials. One of the examples that I actually had with one of my engagement was this client was so good with the way they were managing their admins that they generated password every 24 hours for the domain admins. Right now, the password was auto-generated. One of the downside of that is because it's auto-generated and it's also long. What do you think domain admins are doing? They tend to save these passwords in clear text on their desktop so that they can reuse it on when they have to perform any domain admin level functions. So what I did was, whilst I was doing my post exploitation or lateral movement, compromise one of those domain admins workstations and then discovered the password was saved in clear text on their desktop. So these are things that we tend to look for when we compromise a machine. Another place that we can find credentials are configuration files. So most of the times when you are admin, let's say a domain of 20, machines, it's easier for you to configure each machine separately. But if you're talking about hundreds of machines on a domain, you tend to automate most of the installation processes. So one of the files that is used to auto deploy machines is called Unattend or Unattended.xml. Now that normally contains password of users, most especially the domain, the local admin. Now you wouldn't see this a lot on most modern Windows machines. I think as of Windows 8 or Windows 10, such information is is blanked out. So I would actually demonstrate how that file looks like. You come across web configuration, you come across sysprep, McAfee site list also contains credentials, and you even come across scripts which may have credentials in it. You can come across devices such as Cisco devices, configuration files, which may have a lot of information that contains credentials, right? You may also have credentials saved in registry, and also we talk about Windows credential management, which is essentially the digital vault for Windows OS for storing credentials, right? So let's dig in. So first is looking for clear text credentials on a machine that we have compromised. Now, when it comes to a new operation, once you have established a foothold, now we don't have any well-defined methodology. There are several of them out there that defines the phases that we go through when we perform red team operations, right? And one of them is, privilege escalation, right? Now, what I normally classify this area is I put them into two buckets. We have the privilege escalation on a host machine itself that you have compromised. So let's say Windows 10, right? And then we have the privilege escalation on a network side of it, right? So let's say on a Windows machine or the host machine that you have compromised, you have just unprivileged user. So your goal is to actually find a way to actually escalate from an unprivileged user on the same machine all the way up to, let's say, local admin. So that is what I would say maybe say it's a vertical priv escalation. And then we have the horizontal priv escalation whereby you jump from the initial machine and then move into another machine on a network or within the domain, and eventually even compromise the domain and even jump from one domain to another, right? So when it comes to credential harvesting, it can either be done on a network or on a host itself. So for this demo, let's look into some of the ways that we can actually look for Cleartext credentials on a machine that we have compromised. All right, and we are on this Windows machine, right? So we look who we are, and we'll see the privileges we have. You can just type who am I /all, and it'll just give us everything about this user and the privileges this user has. So let me expand that. And then of course you can go through all this. All right. All right, so these are the key areas that we want to look into, right? So this user doesn't have much privileges on this box, right? Okay, and we can also do net user. and then look at what this user has. So this user has web server admin privileges, which we assume might be the highest this person has. All right. So these are all part of the enumeration that we can make or we can do on this machine, right? So now what we can do is, what if we go back and then look at users on this box? Okay, so we have, this user is what we have compromised. We have the admin, we have install, and then N Mandela, P Lumumba, and then public, right? Of course, we don't have the privileges to go into the other accounts. So what we can do is, let's go back into this user, and then we are going to list the C drive. We're going to list the files within this machine, starting from the user's directory, right? So we can just do from any, we can do the C drive, but that can take a long time depending on the configurations of files on this machine. So for starters, let's just list all the files within the C/user so we can get everything for all the users, right? So we can type dir and then BAS and then C and then users. Got it right? And then let's save it into a file, say files.txt, right? So let's see, and that may take some time. Okay, well, that was fast. And then we can do dir, and we have the file here, right? So now what we can do is, let's do type and files. And as you can see, that's a lot, right? Let me break it. And now here is what we can do. We can now begin to actually go through all these files and then search for specific strings. Some of them could be based on experience. We can search for, let's say, cred or credentials or pass W or just pass or password, secret, whatever that you want to do. We can now go through these files and actually type. We can pipe it with find string and then /I. And now we can just, let's say, look for password. So we're going to look for everything, any of the files that contains the string password, right? Again, based on experience, you can choose any word that you want or any phrase or any, string. So if we type this, now we actually have just two here. So we know that we have this P Lumumba, this person saves his password, and then we have one for this user. So now let's try and see if we can open any of these. And this one gives us nothing. Okay, so now let's try to find out who this user, if this contains anything at all. Okay, type. All right, bingo, there we go. So now we've actually been able to get this person saves a password on their documents. Now, we still cannot confirm whether it's a useful password or not, but at least it gives us a little bit of something to work with, right? What we can actually do is, let's confirm who this user is, right? So net user, and then let's bring the username here. And this person actually happens to be server admin. So that means if this password works, we may be able to actually compromise, servers, because if this person is a server admin group, then that means he or she may have local admin on any of those servers on this domain, right? Now you might think this is easier. Yes, it is. Sometimes it is not going to be as easy as this, right? So for instance, if we just do, if you list the entire C drive, that is going to take us a lot of time, but let's do the C drive. Okay, so we have listed the entire C drive into files 2.txt. So let's see. As you can see here, that's huge. That is huge compared to the previous one, right? So let's do the same thing. Let's do 2, and yeah, that's a lot, right? Now I wanted to do this so you can see some of the work that could be involved in this whole process of you fishing for or hunting for credentials. Now you ask yourself, well, this is a lot of work to be done. Well, yes, you are being paid by your client to act like the bad guys. It is not going to be easier for you, or it's not going to be a walk in the park for you to just do this work and then walk away. You are expected to actually put in more work, which the threat actors would have, right? So if it has to take this amount of time for you to fish through information, yes, you have to do that. Now, there are tools which will automate all these things. The reason why I like to do these things manually is for you to appreciate those who build these tools and how they make things work out seamlessly for you. The more you do things manually, the more you appreciate and the more you also well equipped, because sometimes you may perform this work and you may not be able to actually bring in tools on the compromised machine, and you have to resort to using local utilities on the machine, living off the line kind of way, so you can use built-in utilities to hunt for stuff, right? So that is why I wanted to show you this, right? So that is it. We can again do the same thing, find string, and then let's see um, this. Now we have a lot of them coming up. Now, most of them may not be actually useful, but I wanted to show you the difference between when you change directories, how much information that you get based on the type of directory that you have, you enumerate, right? All right. So next on our technique under the credential attacks is configuration files, looking for config files once you have landed on a machine. In our previous technique, we were able to discover Cleartext credential for a user called P. Lumumba, which we are actually going to build up upon that. We haven't left that alone. No, we are going to actually see how we can actually use that credential and see how far that will take us into, right? But I wanted us to cover some of these credential attacks first before we begin to use the information obtained to achieve or accomplish our way of laterally moving from unprivileged user to a privileged user, either on the host machine or on the network, right? So the next for our technique is looking for configuration files and looking for credentials in it, right? So if you remember, in our previous tags, we actually listed all the C drive into a file called file2.txt, right? So we are actually going to see if we can identify any configuration file on this machine that we can actually abuse or extract credentials from it. The target here is going to be Unattend.xml. Like I said, this is a file that contains credentials to automate deployment of Windows machine on a larger environment. Again, most newer versions of Windows would actually have this blanked out with a password, and you may not be able to get such information. But you never know. I always get surprised when I'm performing these operations. You might find it very useful on an operation. All right, so let's type unattend.xml. Okay, so we get one hit. Okay, again, it can be a bit extensive, so let's actually, okay, so this is what I wanted you to see. I did intentionally make this file for you to see how it would look like if you are working on a modern operating system and the password is actually blanked out. As you can see, you normally see this on the most current versions of Windows operating systems. I would say maybe Windows, I'm not too sure about Windows 8, but I know for Windows 10 and any of those modern versions of Windows OS, you will see sensitive data deleted. This is where the password actually used to be. Most of them are usually base 64 encoded. So I had to give this an example for you to see that in the older versions of Windows, you would have found this. Is that, what I've come across is they are usually base 64 encoded. So now that we have actually identified this password, base 64 encoded, well, what can we do with it? We have to reverse it. And lucky enough, it's very easy to actually reverse a base 64 encoded string. So let's go ahead and actually decode this password. Now, even if we decode it, how do we know whose username is linked to this password, right? So that is why we have to go back to the file again and then look at what user actually has that password. So Let's keep going. Okay, the password is here, and it looks like it's for this user, the install user, right? So if we do net user, this user is actually local admin. All right. So now we're getting our way from just an unprivileged user to now a local admin. If we can crack this password, or if we can decode this password and then see if it actually does work, right? So bear with me. Let's go ahead and actually use PowerShell's built-in base64 encoding to decode this password. Okay, so to decode the base64 encoded password, what I did was I dropped myself into a PowerShell session, and then this is a PowerShell command to decode the base64 encoded password. So this is a string that I have put in here, and then I'll just hit enter, and we have the password decrypted. So so far we have demoed two ways that we can actually extract credentials on a compromised machine, and moving from an unprivileged user to that of a local admin or a local admin on another server. All right. So let's go into another technique for how we can actually abuse credentials on a compromised machine. The next credential-based attack is how we can abuse Windows Credential Manager. All right, so let's dig into how that can be accomplished. So before we dig in and see how we can actually abuse the Windows Credential Manager, let us take a quick look as to how it actually looks like. All right, so this is what we're referring to when we talk about credential manager, right? We have two types. We have the web, and then we have the Windows credential. Of course, most of these are self-explanatory, but let's just do a quick recap. Essentially, this is a place where Windows basically saves credentials for whether you do visit websites or web-based applications, or if you do anything on a Windows side, right? So for instance, if we had visited websites on this machine, we may have had some credentials saved here for web passwords, right? So we don't have any here. If we go into the Windows credential side of it, now we have a list of, we also have a breakdown for even the Windows credentials. We have the Windows credential itself, which is basically for anything on a Windows machine for interactive login. All right. When we establish a authentication to the machine, this is where the login is saved. If we have any certificate, this is where it's saved. And then we have this a generic credential, which is anything, credential wise on this machine, right? So some of the applications that we can think of is like, Skype or, Google Web and all those kind of things. This is where the Windows serves as a digital vault for credentials, right? So now, for instance, as you can see, we have this user here, which we know is a local admin, right? And we have something here that says local admin user. If we click on it, again, it's install. If we click on edit, we can actually change the password here. But again, this is not OPSEC way to do things when you perform engagement, unless it's part of the red team operations. It's not advisable to change passwords when you execute attacks, right? So even though we can change the password for this user, we may not even be able to use it because, we may not be able to see the clear text of it. There are tools out there which I'll leave it up to you for you to do more research on to actually extract the Cleartext credential. But for the sake of this, I want to show you some novel way or some another way that we can actually use this password or use these credentials without knowing the password itself, right? If we go here, the same thing. If we click on edit, we see it, but we cannot change it. We cannot see the Cleartext credentials. We can change it, but we cannot see the Cleartext credential, right? So then how can we, on operation where we don't have access to, let's say, a GUI access to this box, what can we do? Well, the good thing is the credential manager has a utility or a command line that we can actually use to enumerate or interact with this digital vault, and it's called CMD key, right? So to list the credentials on this box, we can just type CMD key and then / list. And that is going to list what we have actually seen on the domain side, right? So I mean on the GUI. So as you can see, we have the domain password. Again, the ones that we are very much interested in as offset, offensive sex is we want the domain, target, or we want the legacy generic, something like that, right? Or even interactive, right? So that is what we're looking for. We're looking for domain password, all right, or generic password, right? And again, it happens to be the same, user. So now we can tell that we have this, user, but how can we abuse it? Well, there is another way that we can actually run a utility within using somebody else's profile to do that. It's called run as, right? So if we decide to actually want to be this user without actually knowing their password, let's see, can we actually execute, open a new terminal under the assumption of this user without providing a password? So if we type run as and then we do user and then install and we hit enter. Oh, sorry. And let's say we want to open CMD. Actually, let's do PowerShell. All right. That is going to ask for the password for the user install. Now, we have that from one of our tags, but let's assume that we don't know this user's password, right? So that means we can open PowerShell or any other utility, right? So if we type, let's say, run as, and then / ? And then we go through and then look at the options we have here. We have one here that says save cred, right? We can provide this switch or this option, and it's going to use the save credential for this user to actually authenticate us and then open or execute whatever command that we want this user to execute for us, right? So it says to use credentials previously saved by the user, right? So now let's copy this and let's see if we can abuse this. Okay, so now we type run as, and then we provide save cred, and let's keep our fingers crossed, and there we go, bingo. So now if you can see, it says PowerShell running as WKS01 install. So we've been able to actually open up a new session with PowerShell under the user install without even knowing the user's password. So in this case, we can comfortably say that we've been able to actually move from unprivileged user to a local admin by abusing the Windows credential manager feature within Windows machine. All right. Again, these are things that can be automated. There's no doubt. But that is not the purpose of this series of videos. The purpose is for you to actually do these things manually, and appreciate all these guys who put in much more work and hours to build these tools for you to use and automate some of these things for us, right? So if you type who am I, we actually running as the user install. Now we have local admin on this box. So the last technique under the credential attacks technique is how to extract credentials, automate the whole process with a tool called SessionGopher. Now this is a tool which does a very fantastic job to actually scrape out credentials which are saved on the machine. You can, extract credentials from WinCS, WinSCP, party, RDP, and most of the protocols that save credentials on the machine. So I'm going to also show you, a way that you can automate some of the things I have done here using SessionGopher, right? So let's dig in. Okay, so if you remember, we were able to extract the Cleartext credential for the user P. Lumumba, right? But we actually don't know what else can we do with that. So far, we've been able to get credentials for that user, just fishing for Cleartext credentials. We've been able to get the password credentials for a local admin called install using two techniques, going through Unattend file and then decoding the base 64 encoded password for the user, and also abusing Windows Credential Manager. So now let's go back and then see how can we reuse the password P Lumumba, and where can it get us, right? So let's do run as, and let's go in as the user P Lumumba. Remember, that user is a domain user, right? So P Lumumba, we have to provide the domain name, which is a G. Of course, it's going to ask me for the password, which we already have based on our attack. And I have PowerShell up and running. If I do who am I, is P Lumumba. Let me expand. Okay, so I have a folder called tools under the C drive. And if I do list, I have a tool called SessionGopher. So let's do import module, SessionGopher. Okay, and then let me clear the screen and type invoke SessionGopher, and we want to do a thorough scraping of the machine, right? And that was very fast. So if you can see, SessionGopher was able to pull two sessions when SCP sessions. One of them is this one here. Everything is just blank. But if you look, we have here, oh, sorry. We have one here. And this seems to actually have this machine as the destination machine that this credential works on. So now that we actually, and this, of course, is the party one. For some reason, it couldn't retrieve it, but it's all good because the same credential would have achieved the same thing because, when SCP and party would still be SSH related authentication, right? And they all seem to be on the same box, going to the same box. So now we have discovered one machine that this user, P. Lumumba, was able to successfully authenticate into. And by looking at the sessions, we know this is going to be SSH box, right? So the machine that we are on currently right now is 172.100.2.200. This one is 172.100.2.13, right? So now what we can do is let us go to the desktop and see if it is possible for us to actually try this user's credential. So we can use SE, and then we just type in 172.100.2.13, and let's provide P Lumumba and the password. And let's keep our fingers crossed and see if it's going to work. I'll say yes. Yep, it did work. So yep, we are in. So that tells us that P Lumumba's credential that we just got actually does work. There's another way that we can actually do that. We can confirm through party. So let's try opening that with party and see if that also works for us. So we can at least have a command line. And then we can just do open in party, right? So let's try that. And it's going to access for the password again. And yep, there we go. So we've been able to actually move from just a regular user on a machine and then being able to abuse credentials on this machine, on this Windows machine, and actually have a foothold on a Linux box. How about that? Sorry. So yeah, that is it for this video. Like I said, there are several attack techniques against credentials when you do any red team operations. These are just a few things that I wanted to bring up. Of course, I can't cover everything. That would be even impossible, right? But at least you may have found one or two useful things with some of these techniques that have come around. Again, thank you so much for your time. We'll be having most of these videos coming out, in these coming days. If you are new to this channel, I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel and also set yourself a reminder so that anytime that I bring a new video, you will be one of the many people to get to watch it. Thank you so much. Leave any feedback, any comment, like, dislike. Thank you. You have a nice day. Bye bye.